all Chinese cannot come, except for if you're a scholar or a business person, but nobody can become a citizen. So if you're not a citizen, then you can't bring your family here. And that law existed until after World War II.
It wasn't just to say, we only want you here to work, but by excluding women, you couldn't grow roots.
That's
You
right.
wouldn't be able to have Chinese families in these communities.
It is the ingenious piece of legislation. It did what it meant to do, that don't want the Chinese to be here permanently.
That's ingrained racism, would you say?
Institutionalized, and it's done by the government. And it sets the tone. It sets the tone of how the rest of the population would see the Chinese, that they are foreigners. My father has been here since 1938. And my grandfather has been here since 1887. In normal circumstances, I would have been third generation. So you're constantly aware that you are in somebody else's house. You are in somebody else's country. Whether or not that is true or not, but that's how ingrained it is.
We have seen this rash of hate crimes against Asian Americans all across this country. Mm. Is it new?
The biggest lynching in the US history was in LA, Chinatown. 18 men were lynched.
I think most Americans don't know that.
Yes, because that history is not taught. It's not seen as part of American history.
When you hear of this recent violence against Asian Americans, what goes through your head?
People see you a certain way. And when the government have these kind of policy and set this tone, it gives license to people to do whatever they want. There was a scapegoat, just like the 1882 Exclusion Act. That was for economic reason. For the Japanese internment camp, that was because of the foreign war. When we had the Vietnam War, again, Asians were targeted because when the soldiers come home, they can't tell the difference between who's who. You look Asian, you're the enemy. So now, with the pandemic, when you have people in government, particularly a president that keeps saying this is a Chinese virus, it makes people feel like it's okay. Last October, I was walking down the street, somebody followed me and yelling behind me that we should never have let your kind in here. You brought us the virus.
For people who aren't Asian American, they haven't experienced the microaggressions that happen on a daily basis, how can we better explain what happens and what can change?
I think we do have to start from history. When people don't know that you've been here that long, that you are part of the country, they feel like they can do that to you. We have to be telling those stories. We have to be teaching that kind of history in our school curriculum. This is not Asian history. This is American history.
Tú perteneces aquí. That message appears on a building Jose Zacarias owns in downtown West Liberty. On the other side of the mural is the English translation, "You belong here." For 37 years, Zacarias has called this town home.
I came here with $20 in my pocket. I didn't know how to say hi, and here I am.
This town of about 3,700 people in eastern Iowa may have been an unlikely landing spot.
What does it mean to you?
His hometown of León, Mexico had well over 500,000 people when he left.
I grew up in a big city, you know. I am an urban guy. And this was a wake-up call to me.
So too was his new work life. After attending law school in Mexico, his first job in the U.S. was working here in meat processing and packing.
That was a shock, definitely, because previous to that experience, I didn't know how to work with my hands. And when you move here and you don't know the language, you don't know the culture, you need to survive to begin with, and you need to work.
He also found a well-established Latino community, which has only continued to grow. West Liberty became Iowa's first majority Hispanic town. In the schools where Zacarias was once a board member, a dual language program teaches students English and Spanish.
You can go to the grocery store, you can go to the park and find a bunch of Anglo kids speaking fluent Spanish. They know you, and you probably agree with me There is no better way to get into a culture than through the language.
Zacarias is now serving his second term on the city council. The miniature Statue of Liberty in front of the building is emblematic of Ellis Island and so many immigrants who arrive to start a new life. For Zacarias, it has been a good life and a rewarding one.
I truly believe that this country still has the potential to provide opportunities if you put yourself in the position to make use of those opportunities.
West Liberty recently gained another first. In addition to being Iowa's first majority Hispanic city, it's now the first city or town to have a majority Latino city council.
After the election in November, 4 of the 5 city council seats are now held by Latinos.
And still ahead, searching for strength during the struggle.
I lost my belief in God because of what we went through.
Next, he lost, but then regained his faith, even in the face of racism and discrimination. The lessons learned by this civil rights leader.
When I was in the first grade, we were imprisoned. I'm a prisoner of war. Ancestry is not a crime.
Born in America, portrayed as an enemy, but decades later, still optimistic we can learn from mistakes.
We have to make for a better America.
When I play my horn, I want them to feel a sense of liberty. Freedom and happiness, what more does anybody want?
Every note he plays is a nod to his Puerto Rican roots, the culture of music, when Project Community, History and Hope continues.
Welcome back to Project Community, History and Hope.
Employment and housing discrimination, the long road to citizenship, and forgotten crime victims are some of the factors that motivated our next group of community leaders to take a stand for change.
Their impact being felt from New Mexico to Arkansas, Maine, and beyond. Reporter Talia Clark begins with Gerald Talbot's story.
It was hard, but in the back of my mind, I could see that something isn't right here.
Gerald E. Talbot grew up in the state of Maine.
There was prejudice and discrimination, and I was running into it.
It wasn't until recently that Talbot regained his faith after finding peace with his past struggles.
I lost my belief in God because of what we went through.
Can you tell me what it was like that there were no professional jobs at the time, no black police officers, no black firefighters, no black nurses?
I'm a light-skinned black. People that hired me did not know what I was. They didn't know whether I was a Negro or whether I was white. But when they found it out, because if they ever asked, they did ask, 2 days later I was gone. I didn't have a job anymore.
As a young man, Talbot helped bring the NAACP to Portland, where he became president of the organization. He was also invited to participate in the March on Washington with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
To remind America of the fierce urgency of now.
My heart was coming out. It was just the most glorious time I think I have ever been. We were fighting for ourselves. We were fighting because we were black. And we had some things that we didn't have.
What was it like being the first black person on the Maine legislature?
It was hard. I didn't know anything about the legislature, but then I learned. And they learned. The legislature learned too. They created a different organization, which is human rights, and they made me a member of the civil rights organization.
Nearly 50 years later, his daughter Rachel Talbot Ross went on to become the very first black woman in the state legislature.
We always got room to move ahead, but sometimes it takes longer than others. You have to take strides in how well you're doing. Before I got there, it was 152 years.
Talk about what's happening today with the Black Lives Matter movement.
I love Black Lives Matter. It does matter. But I think everybody's life matter. We have to talk about that. I'm older today. I can't do what I used to do. I'd like to. I'd love to.
When it comes to advice for young people growing up today, here's what Talbot had to say.
Always have respect for everybody. Martin Luther King said that.
So that's a really good question. So basically a green card is what you have to have in order to become a citizen.
Mayra Esquivel is advising clients on their immigration legal processes.
You get the English test and then you get the civics test of government.
Mayra and her colleagues help clients with family petitions, DACA renewals, naturalizations, and a pathway to citizenship for immigrant youth who have been abused or abandoned.
It is extremely fulfilling every day that I come into work and I'm working with our clients.
She says many clients are desperate for her help.
Well, the reality is we can't help everyone. And that is one of the hardest parts of this job. And know that the biggest thing you can do for those clients that you cannot help is to be there for them.
As for Mayra, she says her story is why she does this.
I know what it feels like to be in the shadows, to be afraid.
Mayra is a Deferred Action Childhood Arrival recipient.
I was born in Mexico, in Zacatecas, and I came to the United States at the age of 3.
DACA grants Mayra a work permit and a social security card. That allowed her to get her driver's license, attend and graduate from the University of Arkansas Fort Smith, and now work here.
I realized that the way life kind of put me was almost like preparing me for what I was going to end up doing.
Preparing her to help people like 19-year-old Ann Reyes of Rogers, who just got her green card.
I don't want to cry. If you would have asked me 2 years ago, if you would have told me like you're going to get your green card, I would have not believed you. Like I would say no, like it's not gonna happen.
This is Anna sharing the news with her mom 2 decades after leaving Mexico. Anna says she will now be able to attend college.
I want the American dream, and I want to become someone, and I want to make my parents happy.
It's stories like Anna's that inspire Mayra.
It is a strength that I don't think anyone can fathom, with the stories that they carry, the trauma that they carry, and yet they get up every morning and they keep moving forward.
Social media can get information out in an instant. That's the goal of the Navajo Nation Missing Persons page.
So many of us were kind of on that back burner. We were afraid to talk, but now it's like, get out of the way because here we come.
Mesquite is no stranger to the mark left by the missing, murdered Indigenous people crisis.
Before I was even born, both my grandfathers were murdered, and that has affected my family, even though I never got to meet them.
When she was a young girl, her mother's husband was found brutally murdered while her family lived in Oklahoma.
I never thought years later that this would, be something that I'd have to deal with again.
For so many Native Americans, trauma is passed down from generations.
It's a cycle, and I know that we all say that we need to break that cycle. But where do we start?
The Navajo Nation is the largest reservation in the U.S., and even then, some missing cases never make the news.
They'll write a little story about it, but that's pretty much all the highlights we get. And if that's all we got, that's where we turn to social media.
With national cases like the one of Gabby Petito, it leaves one question.
We have so many of our cases that are so very similar to hers, and why is she getting the attention that we need? Why are they shying the cameras away from our Indigenous people that have gone missing?
On Facebook, Mesquite has over 20,000 followers. Beyond that, she organizes events and attends rallies with others, like this 13-year U.S. Army veteran.
I came home, wanting to do something, wanting to give back, to have a purpose, and at the same time, also healing.
Regardless of how difficult it could be, these advocates push on.
If I could just help one family, that's all that matters.
If a family is going to ask for help, I'm going to be there to help. And that's just how it was instilled in me by one of my uncles that raised me. and he was murdered a little over a year ago.
They hope more families will share their stories.
And we will be right there to stand right beside them when they want to be able to tell their story. But for now, all we can do is hold their relatives' name and faces on these boards and talk for them until they're ready to start talking.
To build awareness.
This is something that we have to do as a community, as Indigenous people. We are there to stand up for one another.
In November, President Joe Biden signed an executive order that directs federal agencies to work with tribal governments on sharing information in cases of missing and murdered Indigenous Americans.
The U.S. Justice and Homeland Security departments are also developing strategies to combat violence against Native Americans.
Next, the battle over workers' rights and improving conditions in the farm fields.
If you don't leave, we will wanna bring dogs and will destroy you.
One man is refusing to back down. How his father's experience years ago fuels his activism today.
I try to change that culture.
A newspaper built on advocacy and outreach for the Hispanic community.
It's a big sense of accomplishing, a vision.
The difference the paper and its publisher are making. When Project Community, History and Hope returns.
Immigrants coming to the United States in search of a better environment and life don't always encounter the best conditions while they work to provide for themselves and for their families.
The Hispanic community has been especially vulnerable when it comes to farm work across the country. But fortunately, there are some fearless advocates devoting their lives to fighting for better conditions.
Brittany Johnson talks with one of those activists in California.
A cucumber field. 500 acres of produce, resting under the hot sun and ready for harvest. Luis Magaña's office for the day. His mission,
Tenemos poquito tiempo.
helping farm workers with anything they need.
O de tres, el verde.
Today, he's handing out face coverings to help protect against the coronavirus
Que el trabajador.
and encouraging workers to get their COVID vaccinations.
Some of them are vaccinated already.
The 65-year-old advocate is not always welcomed by landowners. Part of his work includes exposing lack of access to basic needs.
They question me, what you doing? They treat me okay, or you don't leave, we call the sheriff. If you don't leave, we will wanna bring dogs and will destroy you.
These threats are not new to Luis. He and his family came to Stockton from Michoacan, Mexico in 1967. His father was a bracero, one of thousands of Mexicans hired to work in the United States during World War II. The program guaranteed decent living conditions and pay. Luis says that didn't happen. Braceros were housed in overcrowded shacks, cheated out of pay, subjected to racism, and some enslaved.
He told me many stories, and I feeling how they don't change the situation. Then I become a farm worker and don't see too much difference of that story.
Following in his father's footsteps, for 30 years, Luis picked and planted in the San Joaquin Valley. Luis says decades later, it's the same fight.
But now we have issues in the community, racism, discrimination, lack of opportunities to study our kids.
While working in the fields, he organized numerous strikes that he said led to increased pay. Luis tells me about some of the problems and challenges workers face today.
They bring water, but limit the time to get the water. People can have an accident in these machines.
He says the work can also be deadly. No one truly knows how many people have lost their lives working in these fields. According to Luis, deaths, even injuries, often go unreported by landowners.
Pero se acabó ya.
Because of that, he educates workers on the importance of knowing their rights.
And they don't know that that has to be reported. So I try to change that culture, that reported. Not just for you, for all the working workers.
Although progress is being made, Luis knows there's still a long way to go. he remains hopeful that one day there will be no more injustices.
So every day when I wake up, I said, I am going to this place, to other place, to at least to do something, to a little change.
When I got there, they didn't ask me nothing. They took me directly to a cell.
Wrongly arrested and on death row at 13 years old.
I said, I haven't done anything.
The reality of racism in the 1960s and his advice for black youth today. Customs and traditions celebrated for generations, the importance of passing them down and preserving the past.
A costume is what you wear when you're pretending to be something. We are not pretending, this is us.
Imagine being viewed as a national enemy in your own country just because of your heritage.
Or being sent to death row as a child for a crime you did not commit because of your skin color and your fight against racism.
Those were realities for some of the people you're about to meet. Cecil Hannibal has our first story from Mississippi.
73-year-old Hezekiah Watkins now spends his days working at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. Only he's not just an employee. He's a part of history.
And so you grew up in the midst of the civil rights movement. What do you remember most about that time?
Well, I remember watching the evening news. I would see dogs biting individuals. I saw individuals being spat on. I saw individuals being beaten, and I couldn't understand why. But I keep hearing these words, Freedom Riders.
The Freedom Riders traveled throughout the South protesting segregation and Jim Crow laws. In 1961, they came to Jackson. Watkins, just 13 at the time, disobeyed his mother by going to see the peaceful protests, only to be arrested and sent to prison.
They didn't give you any charges? They didn't give you any explanation?
Oh, nothing. When I got there, they didn't ask me nothing. They took me directly to a cell. I said, I haven't done anything. Oh yeah, you've done something. You wouldn't be here if you hadn't done anything. Did they give you a date? A date for what, sir? Did they give you a date to kill you?
At just 13 years old, Watkins was put on death row. After 5 days in prison, he says Mississippi's governor, Ross Barnett, ordered his release. From that moment on, he spent his life working as an activist, organizing boycotts and registering black voters in Mississippi. He was arrested over 100 times, often with unnecessary force.
And I'm sure you've seen the video of George Floyd. When you saw that, what came to your mind?
To see how the officer just treated him like he was just not human. But it made me sad. It made me want to, I don't know, do something. But then you ask yourself, what could you do?
Where are we going? Where is the country going from here?
The way to go was to register and vote. And that's what we started on. And by registering and voting, the results is here in Mississippi. Like I said, the pudding is in the pie based on what we started years ago and based on what is happening now. And to answer your question, yes, sir, things are much better.
At a small demonstration against Asian American racism in Santa Cruz County, there's no one who knows the issue more intimately than 85-year-old Mas Hashimoto.
When I was in the first grade, we were in prison. I'm a prisoner of war.
That's Mas sitting on his mother's lap. That's his father and his 5 brothers. He said on April 27, 1942, during World War II, they were forced from their Watsonville home, spending 3 months at the Salinas Rodeo grounds, and then 3.5 years inside of a barrack at a prison camp in Arizona.
And there were 4 rooms, so 4 different families stayed in one barrack. Each block had 14 barracks, and about 250 to 280 family members stayed in each block. Now, you know how hot it gets in Arizona?
The memory of that heat and being imprisoned along with 120,000 other Japanese Americans
Ancestry is not a crime.
is the reason why Hashimoto has spent his entire life teaching about the impacts of racism. Hashimoto says he's disheartened to see anti-Asian racism on the rise throughout the country, but he also says he sees communities standing in solidarity, which has him hopeful for the future.
We're making headways. We really are. Look who's here. People of all races. They're concerned. They love America, as I do. And we have to make for a better America.
Print.
This run here is 6,000 papers.
Stack. Load. Deliver.
Buenas tardes.
Wilfredo Leon, a retired industrial engineer, is now the editor of the Latino newspaper, delivering papers, but also a way forward for Latinos in the upstate and beyond.
It's a big sense of accomplishing, a vision.
He arrived here from Puerto Rico in 1985.
I met somebody who took me around and showed me the reality of Hispanics in Greenville.
And so began his mission: form an alliance and help Latinos in the area feel more connected.
An issue having to do with food stamps, or an issue having to do with healthcare, or an issue having to do with legal. So we would identify in the group who could help.
Non-Hispanic community leaders quickly noticed, like the Greenville Hospital System.
They created a program for interpretation.
Hispanic patients and families needed help.
And it is significant because, before you had to go find somebody to take you there, or you had to pay somebody to do the interpretation for you. Now you don't have to.
Statewide lawmakers also took notice. In 1999, he pushed to revamp the focus of the Commission on Minority Affairs in South Carolina.
But the law created the organization and gave it responsibility for issues affecting African Americans only.
So, Wilfredo joined South Carolina Governor Jim Hodges' task force to help minorities.
So one of the first recommendations to Governor Hodges was to amend the law and give the commission responsibility for all minorities.
Wilfredo says his eagerness to help others lies in his Puerto Rican roots and memories of his mother.
I always saw her helping people, and I guess it's contagious.
And as he looks forward, Wilfredo says there's one area Hispanics still need to deliver on.
I think we need to start developing political leadership. And I think we need to do that by volunteering our time. And eventually, we will not be the volunteer, we will be the candidate.
And what we're celebrating is the contributions that are made by all of us.
Since arriving in Greenville, Wilfredo says his goal has been to build bridges and light the way for others. Which brings us back to that front page, shining bright each and every week for the last 25 years.
What would this planet be without the sun? And it's not just a light, it's hope. When you have hope, you'll go places.
It is a very powerful means of communication.
The power of art in activism.
Here we've taken the time to deal with social issues that includes race and ethnicity.
This artist's journey, turning racial and gay discrimination into a call for action. And inspired by Dr. King's message, but concerned about what she's seeing today.
Just like it was back in the 60s, it's coming back to fold.
The powerful words about breaking down barriers when we come back.
Welcome back to Project Community, History and Hope. Activism and spreading awareness of different cultures can come in different forms of creative expression: dance, painting, and music.
Our next stories show the power of the arts in protest, teaching history, and passing on customs and traditions. Our first stop is in Vermont with reporter Liz Strepa.
When Ray Vega performs, he wants his music to have an impact.
I really feel when you're able to move people in that way, you are definitely getting to them.
The Puerto Rican musician from New York City now calls Burlington, Vermont home, where he regularly entertains audiences with Latin jazz at Hotel Vermont. He shares the sounds of his heritage by playing at venues across the country.
This music has a rich history, a really rich history.
The world-renowned trumpet player learned a lot about music from listening to the radio while growing up in the 1960s.
That was our source of information. It was our internet.
He studied rock, soul, and salsa by switching the stations, but it was his family who taught him about his culture.
When you enter your house, the apartment rather, we were in Puerto Rico. The smells, the foods, but then you would hear, you would hear the Grateful Dead in the background from one of my brothers listening to it.
Living in the Big Apple, going to concerts was a big part of his childhood.
I would go out as a young kid to go to see the Tito Puente Orchestra or the Machito Orchestra. They were playing for dancers, but then they would have numbers where they were doing the Latin rhythms, but with jazz improvisation over it. So I was drawn to that.
That attraction led him to attend the LaGuardia School for the Arts, where he mastered the trumpet, eventually playing with Latin jazz icons like Ray Barretto.
You go, Raymond, wherever you go, when you pull your trumpet out to play, you have to remember your family in Puerto Rico, because you're representing a long lineage of people that came from Puerto Rico, and you have to think about those people.
Those people, his ancestors, are who he thinks of every time he picks up his trumpet and when he's teaching students here at the University of Vermont, where he continues to inspire other Vermont musicians and have an impact on the local jazz scene.
There's always been great music up here. So what I'm just bringing is a different perspective. When I play my horn, I want them to feel a sense of liberty, freedom, and happiness. What more does anybody want?
He's honoring the legacy of his idols, each note a nod to the past, while hoping to inspire future generations of Latin jazz musicians.
Inside the Box Gallery in West Palm Beach, curator Rolando Chang Barrero, also known as the Birdman, creates his next piece. He's not only an artist, but an activist.
We're gonna get some paint for you. It is a very powerful means of communication. This project was for gay pride, whether it deals with Cuba, whether it deals with my homosexuality because I'm gay and I'm part of the LGBT community. The artwork also stems from that larger-than-life image so that it hits you. I think it's wonderful. I'm giving him a couple little tune-ups here.
Why is this a symbol for our community?
Because this used to be a word that used to cause shame. Pájaro o pájara was a derogatory for gay, which was a shameful word. And
in the Hispanic community?
In the Hispanic community, in the 80s during the AIDS pandemic, a lot of my friends that died were disenfranchised and separated from their families. So we didn't have money to even cover any cost. So they were mostly cremated, and I would do these. Because this in Spanish is akin to the English word fairy, which is kind of a derogatory term for gay. And the back would be an epitaph. So it would take the place of a tombstone, which we couldn't afford to put. So we'd hang them up on trees.
Rolando uses current headlines and historic events as influence. exposing the problems, giving them a silent voice of expression.
Here we've taken the time to deal with social issues that includes race and ethnicity.
Whether it's the 2018 Parkland school shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas.
It had student ID number, age, sex, student name.
Or showcasing other artists, like Dominic Esposito's The Opioid Spoon Project, which brings awareness to the epidemic. Rolando knows what it's like to struggle growing up in Miami. His parents are from Cuba and sought political asylum in the United States.
It was the 60s, and there was no Hispanics. And racism was at its peak. A life change in kindergarten. We had to go out. We had to mix with other kids. We were the ones that stood out. It wasn't once or twice that we would come home beat up or, but that was just a sign of the times in this country.
He says inequality is still rampant, but he uses it to promote positive change in the community.
How do we reach that point where we, as a Hispanics, will be on equal playing field?
It begins with how much do you value yourself and how much are you willing to fight for that value.
Rolando has always drawn outside the lines, using art to make people think outside the box, which he wants to instill in young artists.
As soon as they put a drawing pencil to paper or a brush to a canvas, it's a powerful medium. And if you're going to paint flowers, make sure it's the most beautiful flower in the world that resonates with the broadest amount of people.
Native Americans have a way of honoring life and honoring the things that provide us life that are natural in this world.
Every dance is an expression, a language in itself. The regalia they wear is a personal story.
It's not a costume. A costume is what you wear when you're pretending to be something. We are not pretending, this is us.
The drums represent a heartbeat.
The heartbeat is the first thing that you hear in your mother's womb.
There are more than 500 tribes in the United States.
We want people to know that we are very much a thriving people and that we still practice our customs and our traditions, and we still have ways that we celebrate our culture and teach our culture to our younger generations as well as the public.
If we know where we're coming from, if I know where you're coming from, we can respect each other.
Juanita and Thomas Zermino, a Vietnam veteran, met in Texas.
It's like one of those things where right away you click, that's the one. Of course, it took a while, but heck, I went to Vietnam and everything.
Here we are 50 years later, so we did something right.
The couple encourages people to look into their heritage, taking pride in who they are.
We're trying to get our grandchildren to do the same thing. And we let them know who their grandparents are and what they did and what we did.
Defending the land that we love and have fought for is very important. It was back in the 1800s, and it still is today.
Still ahead, the ongoing fight for equality and civil rights and the importance of looking to the past.
We believed in Dr. Martin Luther King, you do things non-violent.
Some words of wisdom about influencing lasting change.
People who fought in the 1960s for civil rights believe the last 2 years in America show there is still work to do in the fight against racism and discrimination.
Their advice to the next generation as they push forward for equality is to start in the past. Reporter Jasmine Putney brings us some powerful perspective from Nebraska.
Right here. I was about pregnant with my son.
Patricia Brown remembers that day in 1958 when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to visit.
We were just just besides ourselves, Dr. Martin Luther King here in Omaha in our house.
As a young woman in Omaha, Ms. Brown found inspiration in Dr. King's message.
We started marching about different things that weren't right. And so we believed in Dr. Martin Luther King, you know, you do things nonviolent march, you know. And so we were always nonviolent.
But the next decade would bring so many changes. Protests, riots, including a day in 1969 when an Omaha police officer shot 14-year-old Vivian Strong.
She was just messing around with some other kids, and they were messing around in the projects and everything. And this white policeman shot her. You know, didn't give any sign or say, stop this police. Just shot her in the back of her head. And that's what got it started.
Something that strikes me is how eerily similar some of these images from that time look to the images I'm seeing now. So what does it mean for you to see history almost repeat itself now?
Well, it's almost like the same culture in a way. It's coming back to full, you know, just like it was back in the 60s.
What do you have to say to young people who are fighting this fight now?
Just hang in there, but move along, you know, and listen to your peers or your people, parents or those older to you. Listen and find out their experiences, and then keep on trudging along to move it along. And hopefully you can do it non-violently. I'm just hoping that if any of our young people looked at January the 6th, they'll see that that's not the way. That's not the way. And look at, we got the first black woman, I get choked up, as the Vice President of the United States. That's what you should strive for, not through violence, through here, you know? That's the way it should be.
Use your head, listen, and follow your heart. Some important advice for all of us.
To see more stories about unity and diversity from our Project Community Initiative, head to the Project Community section of our app or our website.
Thank you for joining us.